Hey, what's good, people? I'm your co-creative, and in this video, I'm going to show you how I edited this photo in Photoshop. Now, if you want to download the raw files and follow along, the links are in the description. Now, with that being said, let's jump right into it. So, first things first, I open the camera raw image, and usually Photoshop will take you straight to the camera raw section if like the image is raw. And I usually try not to change anything here because you can't really undo it once you click open. So I kept the settings as they were and then chose open. Okay, so now in Photoshop, the first thing I usually do is to clean up, right? So that's the first step. For that, I duplicated the background layer and renamed the cleanup. Then I went to select the lasso tool and do around the dirt on the doors to make a selection. Just like that. And with the selection active, you can press shift and backspace to bring up your fill options and then choose those specific settings over there, content away, and then press enter or just click OK. And then Photoshop uses AI to fill the selection, just like that. You can use the patch tool as an alternative, and then after making a selection, you just drag to a point in the image where you want to sample from, and then Photoshop uses that part of the image to fill up the original selection. So I did the same for the stuff on the wall. Now to her face, I used the blemish tool, which is quick and easy. You just go over the point of a face that had blemishes and then just dab once on them and then the blemishes go away. And that leads to my next step, frequency separation. So I duplicate the cleanup layer twice and group them. Now to keep things nice and neat, I renamed the layers high and low frequencies, just so that I don't get confused. And now for the low frequencies, I added a Gaussian blur filter from the filter menu. And then adjusted the radius till about 3.0, where the details started to go away a little bit. And then pressed OK. And for the high frequencies, I used something else. So from the image menu, you choose apply image, and then those are my settings. Press enter. You have this grayish look. So to get rid of the gray, you change the blend mode of the layer to linear light, right? So that's your before and after. There's zero difference, and that's the point. You don't want any changes between the original and then the frequency separation group, and that just proves that you've actually separated the original into two frequencies successfully. So the fun part with the mixer brush too, those are my settings. My width was set to 40, load 50%, mix 61, and flow at 54. And They are really subjective settings. You can change them if you want, but usually I keep my wet, and that's what I usually vary along the way. And then just with the mixer brush to paint over her face. And you are painting over the low frequencies, not the high, because the high is what's retaining all the rest of the details. Now, my next step is dodging and burning. Dodging and burning is just darkening and brightening parts of the image to emphasize or sometimes exaggerate the light. So usually I just create a group, name it dodge and burn. In the group, I create two curves, one for dodging, one for burning. For the dodge curve, you can just select the hand tool on the properties and then click anywhere on her face, and then use your arrow keys to lift the curve up just slightly to increase the brightness. You don't want that on the whole image, so select the mask and then press Ctrl-I to invert it. So yeah, erasing it from everything so that I can selectively paint it where you want back later on. And the same for the burn. I select a part of her face and then use the arrow keys to bring the curve down, so they are darkening the image. And then invert the mask. Rename it accordingly. Now what you do is you select the mask and then choose your regular brush tool and then reduce the flow to somewhere below 10, because you want to be able to paint gradually and not have the effects all over the place. So I chose the burn layer, and then as you can see, I went over the dark areas of the face to sort of bring those shadows out and then make them pop a little bit more. So that's your before and after. And then I'm painting with white for the brush, by the way, because the mask is black, so everything is hidden. So when I paint with white, it reveals the specific parts I want. So same for the dodge, I go over the bright areas. And then for the dodge, the difference you couldn't really tell, so I went back into the curves. And then lifted up the curve a little bit more just so that I can see what's going on. And then usually I go overboard, so I keep my opacity around 75%. That seems like a good number. Now to see how far we've come, here's a little before and after with frequency separation and dodge and burn. There we go. On to the next step, we are going to make few adjustments, so we create a group for that. Now all the groupings are just to keep everything organized, not because they are really essential. Now the whole image looks a bit too bright, so I'll just create one curves layer and then reduce the general brightness of the whole image by bringing the curves down ever so slightly, just to see how that changes it. Now I created 2 other curves just to separate the background from the foreground. So the first curve was going to be for the foreground, and then the next one for the background. While at that, I'm adjusting the red and blue channels of that curve so that I can affect the warmth and general tone of the image. So I want the foreground to be a bit more warm and then the background to be a bit. Now, as usual, the way to selectively apply it is you invert the mask, and then after you've had your settings done, you go right in and then use the brush to paint over the areas you want the effect to be applied. Now the next thing is to sharpen the image. There's an interesting way of sharpening that I learned from Piximperfect, and then it's to sharpen by blurring. So you create a stamp visible layer. The way to do that is to press Ctrl Shift Alt and E. Ctrl Shift Alt and E. That creates a stamp of all the visible layers. So you duplicate the stamp layer and group it by pressing Ctrl G, and then name it sharpening. For the top stamp layer, invert the entire layer, not because there's no mask, so when you press Ctrl I, invert the entire layer, and then change this blend mode to vivid light. Now with that same layer selected, you go to blur and choose Gaussian blur, and then you start to see little details in the gray. And then around 2.0 was about right for me, so you select that, and then to get rid of the gray, you change the blend mode of the entire group to overlay, and then you're going to have your sharpening effects. This is your before, this is your after. So I brought the opacity down to 80 from 100%. And then made a copy of the entire group because I wanted to paint over specific areas like her eyes. So after duplicating, I created a mask for the group and inverted it, and then started selectively painting over areas of the eyes, the eyelashes, to emphasize those areas even more. Which takes us to the last step, which is color grading. Create another stamp visible layer. Now right click on this stamp visible layer and then change it to a smart object because you're going to apply a filter to it. And once the image is a smart object, you can come back and then adjust the filter even after you've pressed OK. So then we go back to the camera raw filter we saw at first, except that we don't have the in-camera settings, but that's fine. And then over here is where the color grading happens. Usually I go in and make little changes. I wouldn't go too much in detail, so I'll just speed it up for you. And then there you go. I took out a bit of blue from her shirt just to make it a bit more uniform. So this is your before and that's your after. Now from this point on, you can just go ahead and add additional effects till the image looks good to you. But this is basically the entire workflow for how I edit my pictures. Now if you enjoyed this video or learned anything, make sure to leave a like and share it with a friend or another creative, and hit the subscribe button. I have new videos coming up. So here's your final edit.